So Ian is a world-leading expert in the science of the human mind and the reading of motivation at the University of Loughborough. Um, Ian's consulted with lots of major brands on motivation and performance, and most specifically, Ian's passion is around sports psychology. I won't steal Ian's thunder. I'll hand over to Ian, let Ian introduce himself, and I really hope you enjoy the talk and get a lot out of it. So please give a warm virtual Agile Thanks welcome to Dr. Ian Taylor.
Thanks very much, Tom. I'll just share my slides, 1 second. Hopefully everyone can see that now. I will caveat, there was a fantastic introduction there, Tom. I will caveat, we had a couple of beers at the barbecue. So whether that passion carries on tonight, we'll see. I'll let you decide. But yeah, thanks to Agile out Northants, and especially Tom and Mohammed for the invite tonight, and thanks everyone else for giving up their precious time. Obviously, this is a topic about time, so hopefully by the end of it, you won't think you'll have wasted the hour or so. So we'll see. Yeah, as Tom said, I'm a psychologist at Loughborough University, and my area of expertise is motivation, specifically how to balance motivation and achievement with not losing your mojo, so without burning out. So that sort of balance in life where you feel you're progressing and achieving and doing well and living life well, without burning out. And that's exactly what the book is about, really. Many of the processes that I study have time completely integrated with them. And I was saying to Mohammed and Tom beforehand about I wanted to write a book about motivation, but there were millions of books about motivation, or at least thousands of books about motivation. So I sort of tried to look for a unique selling point, and thought about time, and the psychology of time and how to spend it. And it's based on all based on science, but it combines sort of myth, religion, legend, personal anecdotes, popular media, and things like that to hopefully provide some tips and advice on, like I say, how to live well, how to spend your time living well without burning out. And obviously, I'm not doing this for completely altruistic reasons. I want you to buy my book. So there's a QR code, if you haven't noticed it, that it takes you straight to a large global retailer of everything. And I'll put the QR code up at the end if I've convinced you to buy my book. And I'm struggling to change my slides, which is not a good start. Let's have a look. Oh, right, bear with me. Right, we're away. Okay, sorry about that. So yeah, so the talk, I'll start off fairly philosophically and historically about how time is important in all our lives, and then we'll get into understanding a little bit about busyness and why everyone sort of craves it, and yeah, it's really really bad for our well-being. And then the last few things about when to do important things, when to receive benefits, how to begin time in solitude. They're all about strategies that you can do to enhance your motivation and an emotional well-being. And try and rebalance your relationship with time, because as we'll see in the presentation, a lot of people have a fairly dysfunctional relationship with time, and that negatively influences their emotional state. So hopefully, by the end of it, you'll be able to have a sort of a little toolbox of strategies that you can do to improve your relationship with time. As I said, I'm going to start quite broadly. And when I started researching time properly for the book, one of the areas that has contributed to really understanding what time is about is war and conflict. the most famous example is probably the Blitzkrieg in World War II, where Germany's major tactic when invading Poland and subsequently France was to do it quickly before anybody has chance to organize and retaliate massively. And there are lots of other examples where time has been influential in who wins wars. And so this has led in part to a lot of understanding about time and war. So this is a quote from Dr. Zia Merrill, who's a global advisor to NATO and various other organizations on defense and security about how time is not just a unit, not just a measurement of our experience. It sort of, controls, creates limits, both objective realities, but subjective experiences as well. And a lot of the sort of ideas around time can be questioned based on whether your perspective is physics, philosophy, psychology, and neuroscience. So in other words, time is not as simple and as physical as we might think. And one of the important things is that humans, and especially modern humans, think that we can control everything and we're the highest order being, if you like. But that wasn't the case sort of 2000 years ago and millennia ago. We had various gods of that we could worship, various gods of time. This is a picture of Kronos, who was one of 3 Greek gods of time. There was 2 Cronoses. One was Zeus's dad. Was that, I may be right in this? This is a different Kronos, and he was the god of time. And basically, that symbolizes that civilizations worshipped their gods of time. They really respected time and shaped their lives around time. But over the centuries and millennia, it's got to a point now where we see time as a commodity that we can control, largely due to the need for consistent train timetables. It turns out we couldn't have flexible time where it was attached to the sort of setting and rising of the sun. We needed consistent time. And the Greenwich Observatory learned how to measure time precisely and then begin to sell it. So we began literally to think of time as a sort of disposable commodity. Even now, if you think of interest rates on loans and credit cards, that's simply a payment for the amount of time that you've borrowed the money and so forth. Our employment is our salary is a payment for our skills and our time. So we think of time as a commodity now. And I don't think that's the right way to approach it. If you think of we now treat natural resources as a commodity, and we're having various problems with it. And in the same, that if we treat time as this just cheap commodity, I think we have problems with it and our relationship breaks down. And I think that's partly what has happened. We don't respect time very much. Before we get into the sort of personal strategies, there's quite a lot of evidence on if we meddle with time, then problems occur. Most of you have probably experienced jet lag in some form or another, where we cross time zones in a plane and then we feel tired and our natural rhythms are misaligned with the actual time in our home. And then about, I can't remember the precise day, early 2000s, 2005, let's say, a new phenomenon, a new psychological phenomenon was identified called social jet lag. And what social jet lag is the misalignment between the time we wake up due to our obligations and when we should be waking up according to our natural rhythms and the rising of the sun and the setting of the sun. Okay, so you've got a misalignment between essentially when your alarm clock goes off, or when your 2-year-old child wakes you up. You've got a misalignment between when you actually wake up, between when you should be waking up according to your natural rhythms. And that's termed social jet lag. And social jet lag has a lot of negative implications. Um, Slightly luckily, there was a team of researchers in Russia who found themselves able to measure this and conduct a natural experiment. Because Russia has meddled with time quite significantly over the last couple of decades. In pre-2011, they had similar biannual clock changes to we do. We had one last weekend about the clocks went backwards by an hour, and then in spring they go forwards in an hour. So they were similar to that. But then between 2000 and 2014, they switched to permanent daylight saving time, which was moving the clocks forward permanently by an hour. Now, what that did would created a situation where more people were misaligned with with sunrise and the natural sort of rhythms where they were. So more people, more of the time, were misaligned. They were getting up in darkness, in other words, for those 3 years. And then in 2014, they pushed it back and went back to, less people were misaligned with natural rhythms and stuff. So we had that 3-year period where there was a bigger misalignment than normal. And what happened was that this social jet lag phenomenon increased in prevalence quite significantly. So you've got the line at the top there, a number at the percentage of people in their sample, and their sample was thousands of individuals. The percentage of social jet lag between 1 and 2 hours rose to above 90%. And the percentage of people experiencing social jet lag of above 2 hours approached 70%. What they also measured was mood and depression and anxiety as well. And the increase in social jet lag was also associated with increases in negative mood, increases in depressive symptoms, especially in the winter months. So it was exaggerated when sunlight was minimized. And then when they would put the clocks back again, those social jet lag reduced, and there was a corresponding reduction in negative psychological experiences as well. So that was one example of how we can meddle with time and the phenomenon of social jet lag. Another interesting thing is if you look at the United States, because United States have 4 time zones. Which overall is probably a wise thing because then time is aligned with social rhythms. However, there's an interesting phenomenon in that in each time zone, the further west you go, the more misaligned you are with the natural rhythms of the sun. Okay. And so let's say if we take the first, the 5-hour timeline, Michigan, Indiana, and Georgia are more misaligned compared to, say, Maine and Pennsylvania and things like that and so forth. And what you'll find in America is if you control for lots of other variables like social or economic status and things like that, that the further west you are in any given timeline, compared to the just over the border on the east of the timeline, there's about a 10% increase in your chance of obesity and about 5 or 6% chance of increased in being overweight. And what they put that down to is this social jet lag phenomenon, this misalignment, leading to fatigue, poorer decisions around health and exercise and so forth. So this is a nice little another example of how we mess with time. Even though individual time zones are probably a good thing, the way that even small shifts of misalignment compared to natural rhythms can make your negatively influence your well-being, for want of a better phrase. As well as the anxiety and depression in the Russian example, there's lots of other examples. When we mess with time and create this social jet lag, we've got increased risk of metabolic disorders, poor mental health issues, cognitive impairment and performance, and so forth. And so this social jet lag, I think, is a nice example of, look, if we don't understand time, there are quite drastic negative consequences to that. And just to finish this little introductory bit about meddling with time, this is just an interesting fact, really, rather than anything interesting and relevant that you can take away. But China don't have multiple time zones. China only has one time zone. So spare a thought for the people in the west of China, where when it should be the middle of the night for them, they have to get up and start work because they're on Beijing time, which is in the far east of China. So yeah, I don't think there's any actual studies on social jet lag in China, but I can put a small wager on that there'll be some fairly drastic health consequences because they only have one time zone. So anyway, as I said, that was a more broad national example or global example of how we need to understand a little bit more about time, because time has implications for our mental and physical health. Okay, so that's conclusion one. Time needs to be respected. But if we now sort of zone into the individual level, I could probably share some more sort of practical tips apart from live in the east of a time zone. And the first is about busyness and the different perspectives here. Hopefully you'll be familiar with these people. One is Patrick Bateman, the American Psycho from a film several decades ago. And in one of the clips, I think his girlfriend asks him why can't they get married? And he says, "I'm too busy. I've got to work." So you've got that one team where busy is the mantra. And on the other is, if you're familiar with Downton Abbey, you'll know this is the Duchess Violet Crawley. And she was asked, she was in a conversation and the term weekend was brought up. And she asked, what is a weekend? In response to the idea that every day was a leisure day for her. So she didn't understand this difference between work and leisure. And that opens up an interesting state, for want of a better word, that we're in, and a lot of Western societies are in. Specifically, we see busyness as a status symbol. For example, there's a nice study where they had two groups of people. On the one hand, they presented Jim, a 35-year-old who works hard, works 10 hours a day during the week and works on weekends as well. And then they also presented a different Jim who works less than 7 hours a day during the week and doesn't work on weekends. Okay. And then they asked participants to rate the social status of the gyms. And what they found was that the busy gym was deemed to be much higher status than the leisurely gym. And at the bottom there, if you're interested in the statistics there, yeah, so we see generally that people who are busy as higher social status. So there's some sort of seeking busyness as a status symbol. So you have that on the one hand. But on the other hand, lots and lots of people have this idea or this feeling of time scarcity or time poverty or time inadequacy. It's called many different things, of having too many things to do and not enough time to accomplish them. So we see it as a status symbol, but we don't have enough time. And there's this conflict. We want something that's not very good for our health. There's been lots of surveys done, and in North America, in Germany, Japan, and various other countries, and it roughly works out of 80% of people, so 4 out of 5 have this feeling of chronic time scarcity, where there's just too many things to do and not enough time. So it's a prevalent phenomenon. Some of you might be familiar with the 4-day work week. There's been some quite it pops up in the news quite a bit, and it's had some quite high profile trials and some quite high profile advocates of it. Essentially doing the same amount of work. There's various ways you can do the 4-day work week, but essentially it's doing where it's working for 4 days and getting paid the same, and productivity doesn't seem to decrease. But this graph specifically looks at when you reduce from a 5-day work week to a 4-day work week, people report less time inadequacy, less time scarcity. So whatever context you consider there, whether it's caring for children, housework, cooking, they have more time to do it. Okay, which is not particularly exciting. If you go from a 5-day to a 4-day working week, then you will have more time to do other things. But the interesting thing there is that productivity doesn't typically go down. So what people are doing are cutting out work fast. They're prioritizing a lot more. It's almost giving them permission to say no to meetings that they don't think they can contribute to, being on their emails less or whatever. But they're reducing their time scarcity, but they're still getting things done at work. Okay, so the conclusion at work and in work settings there is cutting out. I call it faff. I'm sure that you know about the word. The activities that you need to do, and it's like, why am I doing this? It's not important. I'm sure I certainly have it in my work, and I'm sure everyone does here as well. So at work, I think it's about to reduce time scarcity. It's about cutting out the faff. And when you do that, these 4-day work week trials, I think this is the data from the UK. If not, it's UK, it's from the US and Ireland, one of those two. That when you go down to a 4-day work week, most people reduce symptoms of burnout, and a lot of people also, more than half of people, reduce work-family conflict. There are, as you can see, there's some that go the other way, but not many. So at work settings, to reduce time scarcity, if you cut out the faff and prioritize important activities, then you can increase your well-being. Okay. Whereas in social settings, in your non-work life, it's a bit more tricky. The general feeling that people have is that if you create more time, you will feel better. Okay, so let's say, we've all experienced it, to like say the time scarcity, just fizzing around, not being able to get things done and feeling exhausted all the time, etc. So people think, okay, well, if I remove things from my diary, I'll then feel better. But quite often it doesn't happen, and then you get into a cycle and your diary fills up and you're still not feeling great and so forth. Well, actually, I think a good way to look at it is the other way round. If you can somehow make yourself feel better, then you will have more time without significant changes to your diary. And that might seem a little bit counterintuitive, but hopefully the next slides explain it a bit better. So what I'm saying is we need to work on our emotional well-being, and that will help us with our reducing our time scarcity and help us have more time for the things that we value. And William James in psychology lectures when I'm teaching, everyone will know who William James is. William James is basically the godfather of North American psychology, and he's written on a lot of things, mostly about things around identity and things like that. But he summarized it well in that our feeling of time, our perceptions of time, harmonizes with our different mental moods. In other words, our emotional well-being impacts how we are perceiving time. And I think that is a good way to think about it rather than, oh, I need to give myself more time and more space in my diary, and that will make me feel better. I think we should look at it the other way around. And this is one of the reasons why there is a fundamental difference between being busy, sort of objectively, if you look in your diary and your schedule, versus feeling busy, and in particular feeling too busy, this experience of time scarcity. This is just one example of this effect. This study looked around about 250 women, and what they did was ask them to, as objectively as they can, report what they were doing each day over a number of days. Okay, so filled in sort of diaries. I did this, I did housework, I went to work, I looked after children, I exercised, or whatever they did. Okay, and they split them into 4 groups along the x-axis there. There were, it's not surprised that some were not busy at all, some were not very busy, some were quite busy, and some were very busy. Okay, from a relatively objective perspective. But the interesting bit is when the researchers then asked them how much available time they had, in this case, what the data are important is for physical activity, there was no relationship between the amount of time available for the individual and how much time they had and how busy they were. Okay. So in other words, there was no relationship, and again, for the stats people there, the number in the corner there, it's almost no relationship whatsoever between how busy these women were and how much time they had available for other activities. Okay, so in other words, being busy and feeling busy are very different constructs. Okay, and it's the idea that feeling busy is the important thing for our well-being. It doesn't matter how busy it doesn't matter very much how busy we actually are. That has no relationship with how overly busy and how busy we feel we are. So
Yeah,
that's why, yes, go on.
I've got a question I think quite relevant to now.
Yeah.
I think it's specifically relevant to people feeling busy, being in meetings, possibly sitting in a meeting you don't feel like you're adding value to. So the question is, how might we encourage more members of our teams to feel empowered to say this meeting is not valuable, removing fear of judgment from others and their managers?
Yeah, it's a great question, and the problem is it differs between each sort of industry and each organization. So I think it's a leadership issue, really. I mean, in my world, with yeah, hopefully none of my employers are in this call. We have a lot of meetings that we don't need. Um, and I think it's partly because in my world, people sort of haven't. We're not business people. We're paid to sort of sit back and think some of the time, and anyway, as if you sort of took that into another industry. So we have a lot of meetings that don't mean anything, but we also have a lot of freedom to say no. Um, uh, Whereas I think a lot of other sectors and industries, I think it's more of a leadership issue to be aware, look around the table, and if you're chairing a meeting of 10 people and 8 people are not contributing, then there's a problem there. There's an issue. Those 8 people don't need to be there. And so it's a great question. Yeah. Other times I think you can go even higher in the culture and sort of, if people, reward or incent, not necessarily sort of tangible terms, but sort of incentivize people, highlight positive examples where people have said, you know what, I need to prioritize this so I'm not going to go to that meeting. And if they then get a feedback from their manager or someone in leader positions, that's great. That's good sort of time management. Yeah, so that's the best answer I can give on that, really, without sort of knowing the sectors. I think it's a leadership slash cultural
It's
issue.
culture. I was going to say it's culture, isn't it?
Yeah,
And it's there's I guess there's techniques to developing that culture.
exactly. Yeah,
There's
exactly.
there's another related question as well, if you don't
Go
mind,
for it.
Ian.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if this is your field or not, but it's around neurodivergence and how. Well, the question actually was how do tactics for effective motivation time management get impacted by neurodivergence? Can they still apply? Because I think
Um,
there's sometimes some characteristics around neurodivergence, and that you're talking about well-being and feeling busy.
yeah. It is outside my area. What we are learning. So I'm not going to answer the question, but I'm going to try and sort of sort of talk about that topic in terms of motivational. Uh, the one size fits all strategies should be, really out the window because there's this greater awareness of neurodivergence. But I think what's more interesting, certainly in my field, is that you can learn a lot from people who are neurodivergent on especially things like time management and how, and what motivates and important things, what people think motivates them compared to what actually motivates them. There's a lot of interesting stuff around neurodiverse people. And I think if we expand the continuum of neurodivergence, what we're essentially saying is that, like, for example, I'm going to give quite a few tips on strategies, but what people need is a toolbox. And for that individual, that might work, that might work, and that might work. Whereas for that individual, completely other strategies might work, irrespective of neurodivergence. It's just an individualist an individualist perspective. I think that works in a lot of ways. So not just in somebody who's labeled neurodivergent. I think in just if you treat everyone as individuals and don't press strategies and time management tips on
Yeah.
them, I think that's the best approach, really. So yeah, so I appreciate that I haven't answered the question really, but that's just my thoughts on this area and the idea of neurodivergence.
I suspect it's probably where this kind of research is probably where things like the Pomodoro technique came from, which you've probably come across,
Yeah, I have. Yeah,
which
yeah,
is like it's batches of 25 minutes of focused time.
exactly.
Just
And it's interesting. So I applied that technique in my lectures now. So I have breaks after every. So I have let's say a typical 2 hour lecture. I used to have a token one after every hour, whereas now I have breaks every sort of 25 minutes, half an hour. And it was based on greater awareness of neurodivergence. So that's why I did it. However, it was universally, you know, applauded. It was like every student was like, this is great for my concentration. This is great for my well-being. I don't have to sit there needing the bathroom for an hour. Little things like that. So even though I brought that in to be a little bit more aware of neurodivergence, it was blanket approved. So yeah,
great. Thank you, Ian. Sorry to interject.
no
I
problem
think
at
that
all.
was a good conversation.
No problem at all. Yeah, so this slide, I can't remember specifically where I was now, but essentially there is no relationship between being busy and feeling busy, and it's the feeling busy that we want to alleviate because that has the implications for our well-being. Being busy has less implications for our well-being, so it's the feeling busy we need to, and the way we can reduce feelings of busyness and overly busyness is to work on our emotional well-being. One of this in terms of the research world, this is really messy, but this is probably the clearest picture. that we can portray in that. Well, I'm going to simplify it first of all, then talk about it in more detail. It's about time flies when you're having fun. Okay, that's how. That's one really good example of how your emotional state impacts upon your time perception. But from a motivational perspective, you can generally be one of two ways. You can have an approach-oriented mental state, okay, which is trying to sort of strive for something. So you've either got a desire for something, or you are determined to achieve something. So you're seeking a goal, you're seeking a benefit, or something like that. So it's an approach-oriented, motivational, emotional state. And on the other hand, you can have avoidance-oriented emotional states. So things like fear and anxiety are avoidance-oriented motivational states. And importantly, you can be neutral. Okay. And those different categories of your emotional state are quite good because they quite clearly link to the speed of your internal clock. Okay. So I'm going to hopefully get this right. So as we lean towards an avoidance-oriented motivational state, the speed of our internal clock increases. Okay, so we have an internal clock. Okay, so what that means is when we're fearful, anxious, avoidance-oriented motivational state, our internal clock is whizzing around compared to actual clocks. Okay, so what that means is something like 6 minutes. Okay, or well, something like 1 minute feels like 6 minutes. Okay, so you've actually gone through a 1 minute period, but your internal clock has whizzed round, so it feels like 6 minutes. Okay. And in contrast, when you're approach oriented, when you're desire and when you're determined to do something, you're trying to be productive and effective, your speed of internal clock slows down. Okay. So when you've gone through 12, 15 minutes, it's when it feels when you've gone through 12 to 15 minutes, let's say, it feels like 6 minutes. Okay, so it's slowed your speed of internal clock, so time flies because your internal clock has slowed down relative. Okay, a good example of that is I'm a celebrity, get me out of here. Okay, and specifically a few years ago there was a Champion of Champions episode or series, and the three finalists were I can't remember, it was one of the banjos from the dance group. It was either Ashley or Jordan. Mylene Class, the singer, songwriter, radio presenter, and Fatima Whitbread. And they were all in the final. Okay. And in the previous tests, they pretty much shown, I'd be fairly confident that they were in an approach-oriented motivational state. They weren't motivated by fear and anxiety. They're motivated by getting the stars for the meal because they were really successful, those three particularly, in getting stars for the meal. So I'm making an assumption, but I'm really reasonably confident that they were in an approach-oriented state. In one of these tests, what they had to do was sit there while various critters and snakes were put in their goldfish bowl that was on top of their head. Okay, so they had that all going on, and they had to predict when 6 minutes was up. So that's why I was using 6 minutes before. So they had to predict when 6 minutes was up. And so what happened was that, especially Mylene Class and Fatima Whitbread, because I'm making an assumption, but a reasonable assumption, because they were in this approach-oriented state, they actually stayed in there for 15 and 12 minutes respectively, and then pressed their buzzer, and they thought they were only 6 minutes. Okay. So in other words, time flew. They thought it was 6 minutes. It was actually 12 and 15 minutes. So time flew for them because they were in an approach-oriented state. Okay. Whereas others who were just so scared and anxious about the critters, okay, they were in there for 1 minute and it felt like 6. Time slowed for them. They thought it was an eternity, and actually they're only in there for 1 minute. Okay, so that's a really good example of how this approach, avoidance-oriented works. The problem is, too many of us, too much of the time, are in these different approach-oriented and avoidance-oriented. So never quite living in neutral, never letting time go as normal. So it's either whizzing past when we're trying to be at work and being productive and et cetera, or when we're being fearful and anxious, it's taken an eternity. We're never in this neutral state of just being. Okay, so we're never in this right emotional time for our internal clock to work normally. And that's why I think that if we work on our emotional state a little bit more, I think the speed of our internal clock rectifies. And so we can sort of live normally at a normal speed, for want of a better word, rather than either time flying or time just plodding along very slowly when we don't want it to because we're fearful and anxious or whatever avoidance-oriented emotion we're experiencing. So in other words, at work, I don't think we need to sort of empty our diary to create better time. Okay, I think we should cut out again the faff. I think is what we need, the needless meetings at work, and then in our social life and our normal life, we need to prioritize our emotional well-being. There's we know how to prioritize emotional well-being, good quality relationships, physical health. So, not too much alcohol, not too much junk food, a bit of exercise here and there. We know lots about how to fix our emotional well-being. Hopefully in the next few slides, I'll give some sort of tips, and like I say, just to sort of add a toolbox, if you like, on how to improve our emotional well-being from a motivational perspective. One of the things that I think you should do is first identify what important things are. And in the book, I talk about important things are things that nourish the soul, as a sort of slightly waffly term. But there's quite a lot of, there's an extensive amount of research on what does nourish the soul. Okay. And so in the book, I talk about high quality social relationships and feeling effective. Okay. And the third one being the captain of your own ship. Okay. So the specific activity will differ. Okay. But I'm sure we've all got things that we think, do you know what? I really want to, whether it be start exercising or start writing a book or, start a new hobby, start origami, whatever it is, we've all got something that we think, do you know what? I'd really want to do that. Okay. And so what I mean by important is personally important, something that will nourish the soul, not something that is urgent, and especially not something that is urgent for somebody else. Okay. So I think what I want to do is focus on this idea of personally important things that nourish the soul. Okay. And the first strategy I'm going to suggest is when to do it. One of the reasons why I'm going to suggest when to do it is willpower. I study willpower quite a lot, and if you look at religion, myth, and certainly in religion, some of the stories have not aged well. But if you take a story from the Bible, there's a lot of sound advice there, and they're essentially written from intelligent scholars of the time. Okay, and you will see multiple stories about the foolishness of relying on willpower. Okay, Adam and Eve is probably one of the most famous. You can live in the Garden of Eden forever and ever, for eternity. You can eat what you want, do what you want, but please just do not eat that apple. Whatever you do, just that single apple. Eat all the other apples, just not that apple. Okay. And what did Eve do? The serpent came along, started whispering, "Oh, eat the apple, eat the apple, eat the apple." And she ate the apple and was banished to Earth and all sorts of ill consequences. And you know, in Greek mythology, you have Pandora's box. Come on, Pandora, whatever you do not open the box. Whatever you do not open the box. What does she do? She opens the box. Okay, so there's a lot of stories which are basically advice on do not rely on willpower. Okay. And yet, nowadays it's this idea that willpower needs to be really, really strong, and you need to rely on it, and you need to resist temptation, and all these manner of things. Okay, willpower is not designed to resist temptation, especially in modern day society. Okay, so if you are this nourishing activity, this new activity that you want to do, and you might need a bit of and that might require a bit of effort and stuff. But if you take any really sort of arbitrary time period, willpower will reduce, especially over the course of the day. There's lots of reasons why willpower will reduce over the course of the day. But generally, you feel fatigued, you feel stressed as the day goes on, and so willpower declines. So your not your necessarily ability to use it, but it's more your desire, your willingness to use willpower declines over the course of the day. Okay. So willpower is not what we think it is, and it's not this magical thing that we need to be successful. Okay. So if we take that first idea that willpower reduces over the day, equally or relatedly, humans are really, really bad at predicting what they're going to feel like in the future. Okay, so you will see more, of course I'll have it. Yeah, what I'm going to do is have a day's work, and then I'm going to go to the gym, for example. And then when we get to that point in the evening, we're absolutely shattered, and so forth. Okay. So we're really bad at, so our willpower declines over the course of the day, and we're really bad at predicting what we're going to feel like in the future. And then also there's also statistics in that, let's say we get up in the morning and we start, you know, we're eating our cornflakes and we're starting to plan the day. And I'm going to use the exercise example again as my nourishing activity, but it could be everything. The longer we give, the more that life will get in the way. So this is a typical day for most people, I would argue, or, you know, things like this will happen. So let's say I want to do exercise when I wake up, and I'm going to do it after work, but then, you know, my school informs me that my child has vomited over everywhere. My washing machine has leaked, and then I still think, oh, I'm going to exercise, and then finally, as I get home, my partner's left their boot in the alleyway, and I've tripped over it, and my ideas of exercise have got up in smoke. So in other words, the longer the time period, the more opportunity for life and barriers to get in the way. Okay, so you've got three related things there. Willpower declines over the period of the day. We're really bad at predicting what we're going to feel like in the future, and just statistical probability of life getting in the way the longer we leave our intentions. So all three of those ideas all imply that we should do these important things as early as possible. Okay. Now, some people might think they're not morning people. Some people might be a baker or a milkman and have a job that requires early work. Okay. So it's not necessarily doing it in the morning. Okay. But it's doing important things as early as possible. Because of where I study at Loughborough University, and we look at sport and exercise quite a bit, we've got numerous studies now that say the earlier you plan to exercise, for example, the more likely you are to feel that intention. Okay, there are times when once you've built up strong sort of motivational foundations, you can relax that rule. But anything new, I would strongly argue to do it as soon as possible. Before you turn on your emails, for example, before you, I don't know, do the food shop or whatever the sort of they might be urgent, but they're not important or they're not personally nourishing. I would do it as early as possible. And I think for most people, most of the time, And that will be a good start to finding these nourishing activities and sustaining them to build these this good emotional well-being.
Ian, there's an interesting comment from Gordon. He's saying,
Okay.
or he's asking, is it important or complex tasks that should be done as early as possible?
That's a good question. All things, so I'm talking about these personally nourishing activities, but equally there is ideally if it's a personally nourishing and complex activity, then you definitely want to do it in the morning. In the real world, we have to do so let's say you've got it's a complex activity versus a personally nourishing activity. I would probably, I appreciate what I think Gordon, you said it was that complex activities need to be done earlier because that's where typically for most people there's a lot of evidence that decisions are better and your executive functions, your high level brain functions work better in the morning. Okay. Sometimes in the real world, you're going to have a choice. Yes, I've got this complex work task that might need to be doing, or I've got this personally nourishing activity that I would need to be done as well. So you've got to make a decision. Can the complex activity wait long enough for me to do the personally nourishing activity first? Is probably the question I would ask. And I would really try my hardest to find the answer. Yes, my personally nourishing can do it. I still have enough brain power to do that complex task. But I appreciate what Gordon's saying, that there's evidence to say do the complex task first. But I'm taking it from a well-being perspective. If that complex task does nothing for your soul, leave it.
I suppose where I was coming from, Ian, was that I'm constantly then looking for simple, important things to do in the afternoon because that
Yes.
keeps me going.
Yeah.
Whereas, I want to do the complex, more challenging things in the morning.
Yeah.
Even at the risk of not doing the personal nourishing ones, as long as I've got in the future.
Yeah, that's why I think that's why I think a lot of people do. They sort of take these complex activities because you do need the brain power that's typically there in the morning that isn't in the afternoon. But that's sacrificing. Well, what I'm saying is it's sacrificing your emotional well-being because you then won't have enough brain power to do the nourishing activities in the evening. So what I'm saying is if you want to really, really prioritize your emotional well-being, get the nourishing done first, and I would argue for me, certainly if it's urgent, let's say it's a work task, it might be a bit more of a pain, but you will get it done. And you've got your nourishing. But if you do the complex task first, I don't think you will do the nourishing task. Whereas I think if you do the nourishing task, I think you still will do the complex task. Or more likely to, I should say. Yeah. Whereas complex and then nourishing, I don't think you will then do the nourishing task because it's not urgent. I think that's probably where I would sit. Does that make sense? And it takes some getting used to. I used to writing the book was a good thing, a good example of this, where some of the stuff I had to sort of research quite heavily, and I was writing things that it wasn't catching fire, and it was difficult. So it was very tempting to put it off, but I knew it was really. It was writing this book was nourishing for my soul, was good. So I really had to fight, like get this done first. Yeah, get this done first. So mine's not quite the same because it was A, complex, and B, nourishing. Yeah, but certainly I sort of prioritized the nourishment for quite a bit over the complex tasks. I do my French early in the morning, first thing in the morning as well. Most people know about Duolingo these days. Duolingo is not important, but it makes me feel good. So I do it before I start clicking my emails on. And so I think there's lots of sort of, certainly from a personal perspective, I think it works. Because they're not urgent. If you leave them till later, you won't get them done. I think because you'll be too tired, too fatigued, because you've done all these complex tasks. But it does take some getting used to. So do important things as early as possible.
Ian, sorry to interrupt
go
you
for it.
again. As an
No problem,
interesting
Tom.
point from Richard about you sometimes hear about larks and owls, morning and evening people. Do you agree with this?
I do. I don't think it makes much difference. Partly because, so I write about owls and larks in the book, actually. Partly because when it's as early as possible for you. Okay, so if you're an owl and you're getting up at, let's say, 10 a.m., if that qualifies as an owl, you get up, then it's as early as possible from then. Whereas if you're a lark, you might get up at 6 a.m. It's as early as possible from then. Okay, so it's as early as possible. So I started this, when I started thinking about this idea and research, it was all about doing it in the morning. But then, as I mentioned, sort of slightly off the cuff about bakers and milkmen, but that's essentially what I mean. And it's the same for owls and larks. Whatever your early as possible is, because some people are really creative in that. Again, I'm going to talk about exercise. Some people will say, but I've got the school run and I've got to do this and I've got to do that. And so then they will think it's only possible after the school run. Whereas more creative people will go, okay, I've got the school run, but actually I can ride a bike on the school run and take my kids on the back of, or take my kid on the back of a bike. And so it's as early as possible for you, whether you're an owl and work, whether you can creatively sort of adapt your routines and so forth. But I still think it would work irrespective of various characteristics like being an owl or being a lark. There's some good stuff about in the book actually about owls and larks, and basically it's we need to feel a bit not feel sorry. I don't think you should feel sorry is not a great phrase, but society is not built for owls, which is problematic for a lot of people, and how we can sort of manage that situation and how we can make society a bit better for owls without negatively implications for larks. But anyway, yeah. So conclusion 3. Do important things as early as possible. The next bit is when you should receive your benefits, and it's not benefits about like we're all becoming unemployed and queuing up at the post office or wherever we do it online now. It's about what are the reasons, what are the benefits, what are the outcomes, what are the rewards, what are the reasons for doing a given activity, and this is probably one of the most robust ideas in sort of motivation science and motivation psychology. The idea is you should do it for immediate benefits. Okay. And I will give the, again, forgive me, but it's just what I'm more familiar with, but it applies to any activity. It's about exercise. Okay. Most health promotion is most exercise promotion is about doing exercise because it's physically healthy. Okay. Or you're going to prevent illness in later years. Please exercise so you don't get diabetes in 30 years time or whatever. Okay. But that's a really sort of big time gap between what you're doing, the exercise, and the benefit you're getting. Whereas, as I said, one of the sort of pretty robust finding is that when you do something for immediate benefits, that is much more sustainable. This is an example in terms of number of repetitions of an exercise. Okay, so what these guys did was got people to exercise for an immediate outcome, the enjoyment of doing the exercise, versus got people doing it for a delayed outcome, physical health benefits. And what they found was that people did more exercise, did more number of reps from that given exercise when they did it focused on enjoyment compared to a delayed outcome. There's loads of other examples that I could have give on that. People stick to New Year's resolutions more if they do it for immediate benefits compared to delayed benefits. There's other people eat more carrots if you focus on the fact that carrots are actually quite sweet and quite tasty, versus all carrots are healthy. Okay, so if you can focus on immediate benefits, what's an interesting sort of related idea to that is most immediate benefits, or quite, no, not most, quite a lot of immediate benefits can be psychological. So do they enhance your mood? So if something enhances your mood, you will do it. You will sustain it because it's an immediate benefit. Okay. Whereas, if you're doing exercise for weight loss doesn't occur immediately, so that you won't sustain it for very long. All things equal, it being equal, or you're certainly less likely to sustain it. And so doing exercise for an immediate benefit, it could be enjoyment, it could be mood boosting, it could be because you fancy the instructor. Whatever the immediate benefit is, focus on that. Okay, so you might have a health goal for exercise in the future. That's fine. So you might do exercise because your doctor said lose some weight or something like that. That's absolutely fine. But that's not what you should focus on to motivate yourself and sustain it. You should focus on choosing an exercise or activity that is enjoyable or has some sort of social benefit or something that you enjoy, I think. As I said, I've spoken about exercise mostly, but that's for any activity. You need an immediate benefit. You've got to work really hard if you don't have any immediate benefits to your activity. Okay. And that's not to suggest you don't have long-term goals and things like that, but I'm saying it's much easier to sustain if you have immediate benefits and you should get some satisfaction from that activity immediately. The reason for that is because of the difference between behavior and outcome. And one of the things that is interesting about motivation is that children have much better motivation than adults. If you ask young children why they've just madly ran across a room, they won't really be able to tell you because they just did it because it felt good. Okay. Children don't do things for certainly young children don't do things for long-term goals, long-term benefits. They do things because it feels good at the time, because it's funny, because they're interested, they're curious, and they're interested. And that's really optimal, because if you take the behavior or any behavior and the outcome, the motivational power is in the outcome. Okay. And if they're close together from a time perspective, then they will, the motivational power of the outcome will transfer to the behavior. They'll be sort of fused, if you like. Again, the exercise example is good for me. So if you exercise for enjoyment, they're really close together. So the motivational power is in the enjoyment, but it transfers to the behavior. And that's what kids do, or young children do. Whereas adults tend to separate them and do things for sort of delayed benefits. We work for the paycheck at the end of the month, or we work hard for the bonus at the end of the year, or we exercise to lose weight for the summer, and so forth. So we really sort of separate them. And so we're motivated by the paycheck, the weight loss, the bonus. We're not motivated. That doesn't transfer to the behavior. And so adults tend to have this suboptimal motivational ideas. It should be that we should focus on immediate benefits, and that makes things much easier to sustain. So any new activity, any nourishing activity that you want to do, I would strongly encourage to, yes, have long-term goals about it, but you need that immediate satisfaction or that immediate benefit to sustain it more easily. So in conclusion number 4, copy children do activities for immediate benefits. Mohammed, I'm conscious of time. How long do I have left?
So we generally end the event by 8 o'clock. So
Okay.
if you want to allow some time for question and answer and some time for closing, you have probably another 15 minutes.
Absolute perfect. Brilliant stuff. So conclusion number 4, focus on immediate outcomes, immediate benefits for motivational person and make it much easier to sustain. This is some new stuff that we're looking at Loughborough, that we talk about in the book as well, about how to start activities. And if you're a watcher of with the World's Strongest Man and things like that, the truck pull is quite a good analogy for how effort and motivation works. And anyone knowledgeable in physics knows about inertia. So when you're pulling a truck, they will almost push to the state of collapse to start the truck. But the better athletes in the World's Strongest Man, once that truck is going, they can then get up a bit of momentum, and it's much less effort. And that's it's a law of physics, this inertia. But motivational inertia and effort work in exactly the same thing. In the same way as physical effort of a truck pull, the effort is greatest to start the truck moving. Once it's moving, the metaphorical ball is rolling, and effort is less. And that's exactly the same for starting new activities. You will find, so we're not talking about actual effort, we're talking about perceived effort, and the amount of cognitive and mental effort you require to start an activity is greatest at the beginning. Okay. Once you've started that activity, subjective and perceived effort goes down somewhat. Writing a book is a prime example for me, in that on some days the thought of opening the laptop was mind-boggling, and I've got to write 500 words today, and it was just the amount of effort I required to do that was quite daunting. But once you open the laptop and start typing away, and then eventually it's the 500 words flow. So in other words, it's starting the activity where subjective effort is highest. Okay. So with that in mind, what we need to do is break down activities to really, really lower levels of effort at the beginning of the activity. And once we've broken up through that barrier, the activity will typically more likely to take care of itself, because subjective effort is lower. So with that idea, I think a good suggestion is to break down these new activities or nourishing activities into tiny, tiny, tiny chunks. Okay. And there's lots of research on goal setting and lots of ideas of goal setting that are out there. And people talk about manageable goals and sustainable goals. Manageable goals and small goals. I don't think we take that idea hard enough. I think we should make tiny, tiny goals. So, for example, I've just given the example of writing a book. Let's say I've got a goal of 500 words a day. Okay, well, I can break it down. I can do it. I can do 100 words. 100 words is still too big. Okay, it's still got a significant level of motivational inertia attached to you. Okay, same with running. Let's say our ambition is to run 5 kilometers or whatever. Okay, well, I'll start with 1 kilometer. 1 kilometer run is still a significant level of effort to get started. Okay, so I don't think we take these idea of small achievable goals enough. What we need to do is almost hijack our brain to focus on a tiny goal. For example, with the writing of the book, the brain thinks of this 500 words as this astronomical task, and even 100 words is still this astronomical task. But if you tell your brain to just open the laptop, okay, it's much easier. There's not much motivational inertia to open the laptop and log in. Okay. With the jogging example, 1K is still too large. Okay, so let's focus on putting our trainers on. Okay, really tiny goals, okay, that have much less motivational inertia in you. For the jogging example, once you've achieved the tiny goal of getting your trainers on and going out the door, the rest will probably take care of itself. Okay, you will then go for a jog. It might not be the complete jog, you might be whatever, but you will then go for a jog. Okay, same with the writing a book example. If you open your laptop and log in and the page is there, you'll probably more often not write something. So in other words, don't sort of scare the brain with thinking about the full activity that you've got to do. You've got to break it down and disrupt this motivational inertia. You know, if you want to take up painting as your new nourishing habit, and don't think about painting a portrait, thinking about, oh, well, just get a tub of water from a watercolors. And then once you've got over that initial motivation, you'll soon be painting away more often than not. So I think we need to break it into tiny, tiny chunks, these new activities, to make it easier to sustain. And the last idea of how we should spend our time is, I suppose it relates to finding what these nourishing activities should be. And generally that happens in solitude. What I've tried to do in the book is find some really interesting, jazzy sort of experiments. For example, I talk about one experiment measured how many maggots people killed when they were bored, and things like that. And in reality, fortunately, no maggots were killed. But that's it. Another one was about making people believe that they went to Disneyland and Pluto. Is Pluto Disney? I can't remember. Anyway, they went to a theme park and Pluto was a drug addict who was hallucinating beforehand, and Pluto wanted to lick their faces, and getting children to believe that. And there's all sorts of weird and wonderful psychological experiments. One of these experiments, this is really interesting, is these researchers got people to have a choice. Do you want to spend 15 minutes thinking, so with no mobile phone, just thinking with your own thoughts inside your own head, 15 minutes, or do you want an electric shock? Okay. And as you can see by the sort of darker, sort of bluish color there, men especially would rather give themselves electric shocks than spending 15 minutes in their own head. Which is bananas. It's bananas for me because I quite like solitude, but it's irrespective of that, it's bananas. Women less so, but still a reasonable amount of people. And the interesting thing is, I learned about this because I reread. I wish I'd put this in the book, but I didn't. They had to exclude one of the men, one of the male participants, because he gave himself 191 electric shocks rather than spending 15 minutes alone. Which is quite staggering. But anyway, so in other words, people are scared of solitude. People are really scared of solitude, and this is just one sort of application of that people would rather give themselves electric shocks than spend time in solitude. But there's a lot of research on solitude in various contexts. This chap on the top right of the screen is a guy called Albert Woodfox, who spent something like over 40 years in solitary confinement. And within that context, there's been quite a lot of research that in solitary confinement where the solitude bit is really good for your psychological health. It's the confinement and the abuse which is not so good for your health. Okay. And that a lot of that research was from the 80s, and because of the idea that it was starting to highlight the fact that a lot of this was mostly done in the States, a lot of prisons were abusing their prisoners. So it sort of fell away a little bit. But if you go back into the research, it's the solitude was good for prisoners' health. It's the confinement and the abuse that was bad for their health. Okay. And then it's gone on to look at sort of in isolated contexts, such as polar expeditions, space expeditions as well. And the main effect of solitude is that it removes social expectations and evaluation, in that and a lot of how we live is all about meeting these social expectations and what other people want us to be like, and what we want or what we think other people want us to be like. And being in solitude removes all that expectation and evaluation. Now, for some people, that's really anxiety provoking because they live because they sort of want to meet other people's standards and not their own standards. So yeah, but if you can get over that anxiety and that desire to rather have an electric shock, what typically happens over time in solitude is that you get really creative and really start planning about who you want to be. And you know what your future holds, and sort of these big ideas start coming into your head typically if you spend enough time in solitude. And from a motivational perspective, B goals are really, really motivating. Okay. So in the book, I talk about solitude is a really good idea because you start developing these B goals. And B goals are really, really powerful. And it's a bit of a waffly term, but what I essentially mean is your sense of character, your true sense of self. That is a really motivating process. Okay. People typically want to behave in ways that express who they are and who they want to be. Okay. So B goals are really, really powerful. This is a similar related example. And there's quite a lot of this in that you can really manipulate B goals in a really acute way. There's about 3 studies in this experiment. What they did was, prior to various elections in the States, this was pre-Trump. What they did, they sent prospective voters 2 different pamphlets and questionnaires about voting. Okay. One was about the importance of voting. So it was based around the verb to vote. Okay, it's important to vote. Okay. Whereas the other questionnaire and pamphlet spoke about the importance of being a voter. Okay. And so they give that. And then in over 3 experiments, and the 2 experiments about here, what they said, the ones who got the pamphlets about being a voter, the importance of being a voter, much more people of those turned up to vote compared to if they just got some information about the importance of how important it was to vote. Okay. So in other words, being a voter somehow resonated more than simply the importance of to vote. Okay. And that, like I say, that's just activating these big goals in a very acute way. But there's lots of research about, you know, if you live in line with who you are and who you want to be, those types of behaviors are really powerful and really sustaining. Okay. I'll give an example for, you know, if being a bookworm is part of your character, you don't need much motivational effort to read books, if that makes sense. Whereas if you think, oh, reading books is good for you, so it's not part of your character, it often takes quite a lot of motivational effort to read books. Okay. In the same way as that, you know, if being a maths geek is part of your character, then creating fantastical software, sort of algorithms and so forth, won't need much motivating. Whereas if you think, oh, right, if I could get good at creating algorithms for computers or whatever, because it'll make me rich, that's not part of your character, you'll give up. Okay. This is one of the things we talk about in sport and exercise, is being an exerciser is really unfair, because being an exerciser, you find it really easy to exercise. If your character is an exerciser, you find it really easy to exercise. Whereas if you're not an exerciser, it's really difficult to exercise. Okay, and so forth. So these B goals are really, really powerful. And I think the best way of developing those B goals and really thinking about these B goals and who you want to be is by spending time in solitude. This is a story from the book that one of them, Sigmund Freud, obviously one of the sort of godfathers of psychology and whatnot. But he was quite backstabbing, and there's quite a lot of alleged backstabbing and stuff like that. And his right-hand man had these other ideas about spending time in solitude to develop these identities. And Freud didn't like it, and so ostracized him and told him he was a mentally ill sort of patient and so forth. And it was really quite interesting in the sort of dark arts of academia and research. But I think once you get over the anxiety, I think it's a good idea. If you don't know what these nourishing activities are, then spending time in solitude to develop some B goals is a good idea. So that's hopefully there's some interesting bits in there. There's some of the ideas in the book about the difference between being and feeling busy, the need to be an early bird for most people most of the time. I think it's a good idea. Have your long-term goals by all means, but to make it very easy to sustain activities, you need immediate benefits and immediate outcomes. Even psychological ones like having a sense of satisfaction qualify as an immediate benefit. If you're struggling to start activities that you think, well, it would be nourishing for my soul if I could start it, then you really want to break it down into tiny micro goals, tiny chunks. And then if you're not sure what the nourishing activities are, I think you should probably have a little, if you can, just disappear, have a mini breakdown and disappear for even 15 minutes and spend some time in solitude to try and create, get creative and start to plan these characters and these sense of selves. Thank you very much. Again, thanks to Tom and Mohammed for the invite, and thanks to you guys for listening in and spending your precious evening with me. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Ian. That was amazing. Let's take a few moments. Maybe we've got about 5-ish minutes for some questions, and I see Gordon's got his hands raised. So, Gordon, do you want to unmute and share?
Yeah, thanks, Mohammed. Ian, yeah, I'm definitely part of the fan club. You talked about being a bookworm there. I recently had the opportunity to count the number of agile books I've got. It's too many, and yours is just winging its way to me from that unknown internet delivery of anything.
Thank you very much.
We've been on the call.
That's very kind of you.
No worries, no worries. My question is, when I come to these kind of things, I think about the conversations in 3 different layers. First of all, how it applies to me, then how it applies to the person that I'll be working with, sat next to tomorrow, and then at a team level. And today I've been able to see the me side, I've been able to see the individual side. Have you got any thoughts on the team side about how we apply this? Because obviously lots of individuals may be larks or owls and could be all different, and about how we all come together as a team to be more productive using some of these ideas.
Yeah, I think the team level. I mean, I spoke about the social benefits as an immediate benefit. So that's probably one way about sort of, the work activity, could be fairly mundane, but if you create a nice team environment somehow, and there's various ways you can do that, sort of team building activities, which are not my expertise, then I think the team itself is a place where you can get the satisfaction from, building those relationships. So the outcome, the benefit is not necessarily in the task itself, but it's doing the tasks as part of a team that is the benefit. And it's the same, the same with sort of, book clubs, exercise clubs. Quite often it's the social benefit that matters rather than actually what they're doing. So that's probably one way that the team works. I think you can probably, let's say this, if we take the early morning in the day idea, and I mentioned that some people sort of lack creativity, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean they see their diary as very, very rigid. And whereas somebody else looking at their diary might be able to say, well, why don't you do that? And do it there and do that and wiggle that around and stuff. So getting people to share opinions on how they can implement it might be a good idea from a team perspective.
May I add one?
Yeah, go for it.
So Gordon, one of the things that I like to do with my teams, especially when I'm working newly with them, is to get to know them individually. And one of the things that I tend to ask them is, what are your preferences of working hours, for example? So are you a night owl or a early bird? And then I put all of that information together after I've assimilated it, and I sort of have a look and say, okay, how many early birds and late whatever, you know what I mean, do we have? And always staying as conscious as I can when we're putting meetings on, is something too early, too late? Are we trying to keep within those boundaries? That's one thing. And I think the other thing that I picked up from what Ian was saying was, if a team is working on a piece of work that's humongous, we're always encouraged to bring things down to smaller pieces of work.
Yeah.
So one question we might ask is, okay, we see that the goal is, in a couple of months or whatever it is, to achieve this full delivery of this software that we want to make our customers happy with. But what is one thing that we can do in this sprint? What is one thing we can do in this week? And then if we can phrase the question like that, it helps the team to say, okay, this week I'm only doing the database table. Then I'm going to do the API. Then I'm going to do blah, 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 blah. And eventually you're going to get your book, as Ian said. So I think those are two things that I've sort of picked up from today's call that are that I would reinforce for myself when I go back to my teams. And
Yeah.
hopefully that's helped.
Yeah, there's lots of ways to do that as well. Thinking about people with individuals, so thinking about the inertia on and effort. So for some people, a task might be a really significant effort to get started, whereas another person might think it's relatively easy, and so be able to sort of start the task. You might have people who are starters. They're the ones that can override this motivational inertia. They want to crack on, whereas typically in a lot of task, you'll see effort decline in the middle. So you want your really keen beans for the middle of the task. And then, to take a sporting rugby scenario, you want your finishers at the end. And you can look at the sort of how people approach effort and where their strengths are across a task, and maybe do it like that as a team as well. Might be another idea.
So kind of get people to become aware of where they are in that thing, and then see to sort of starting to kind of group them together, or get them to build relationships to
Exactly.
keep that kind of approach.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so good. Thank you.
Awesome. I may have missed some questions on the group, so if there are still burning questions, then feel free to ask them by unmuting. We can take probably one more question. I know there's been a bunch of comments and statements being made, but I'm not sure which ones are specific questions. So if you still have them, then please do share.
If I can
Otherwise, we can-
influence Richard to say his one about consequences of motivational inertia.
Yeah.
So, but when you discussed motivational inertia, I thought, as well as overcoming the initial hurdles, as a blocker to that is when you have frequent task switching and you suddenly have to start something else and overcome the inertia again. And when you go back to your original task, then do another thing to overcome inertia. And the more we can do to avoid that task switching, the better.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good point. It's funny because I like switching, but I don't know why I like switching. So I haven't done any specific research on switching. Oh, actually I have, but done a little bit. But you're right. Every time what I think actually would work is when you talk to switching, if you know you've got to switch, what you need to do is when you finish that task, make sure you're reducing the inertia when you start it again. So you finish it in a place where it's easy to get the ball rolling again. So for example, let's say if I write a little bit of my book, but then I've got to do some actual real work. So I quite often sort of just made a little statement at the end saying, the next bit you're going to write about is this. And so when I did a little bit of work and then switched back to it was easy for me. Oh, yeah, right. Okay, blah, blah, blah. Whereas if I hadn't written that statement, I would have been, right, what do I need to write about next? And there's a lot of sort of, and I would have been thinking about it, and the inertia would have been there. So I think if and most jobs, we have to task switch quite a lot. It's very rare that you get a bulk of time to do one thing. So I think making sure that before you switch, making sure that you know exactly what you've got to do when you come back to that task is a good idea. And I think that sort of applies to the end of the day as well. It's not necessarily switching, but I always like to finish a day, and I think it's a good idea, just planning exactly what you're going to do first thing in the morning. So rather than getting up and then you're having all this effort to think, okay, what's important first? Oh, I could do that, I could do this, and all this cognitive effort. If you've done that last thing, you know exactly, you just open up your laptop or whatever, you go to your office, you know exactly what it is, and it's just a little bit less inertia. So not necessarily task switching, but making sure that when you start that task, you finished it, so it's easy to regain momentum.
Great, thank you.
And just to add to that, Ian, I think that fits into the important things, because for me, I do that a lot at the end of the day, and that is my simple, important thing to do to start me the next day.
Exactly. Yeah, I think it's a good tactic to use.
Amazing. Great. Thank you so much, everyone. We probably need to come to a close now, otherwise we'll keep you a little bit longer and you probably don't want that. So firstly, of course, a huge thank you to Ian for sharing these nuggets of wisdom. Certainly I've taken away quite a lot from the data and your lovely examples that I thought were pretty interesting from history, the Bible, and all of those. So very relatable for me. So let's move towards close. If you don't mind, I'm going to take over the screen share.